Tuesday morning arrived with the familiar symphony of adolescent chaos. The corridor reeked of worn textbooks and drugstore body spray, while metal doors crashed shut in rhythmic succession. Tennis shoes created their usual friction-based orchestra against polished floors, and secrets traveled through the air with lightning precision. Every student assumed they understood exactly how the hours ahead would unfold. They were mistaken. Nobody anticipated witnessing the school's celebrated basketball champion, standing 6 feet 3 inches with shoulders that filled doorways, team captain with trophies lining his bedroom shelves, writhing on the unforgiving linoleum. Nobody expected the reserved girl, the same one he had tormented relentlessly, to tower above him with trembling hands yet unshattered resolve. The circumstances leading to this pivotal moment transcended simple athletics, playground intimidation, or even calculated payback. This was fundamentally about human dignity, mutual respect, and discovering inner fortitude that others had dismissed as non-existent. Once you understand her journey, your perception of her will transform permanently. Maya Rodriguez possessed that peculiar quality of remaining unnoticed until someone required a target for their cruelty. Her ebony hair stayed captured in an eternally disheveled bun, wire-rimmed spectacles perpetually sliding toward the tip of her nose, and denim that originated from second-hand stores her mother frequented during brief breaks between double shifts at the local medical clinic. Maya maintained her silence, though weakness never defined her character. She transported textbooks as protective armor, her spiral notebooks overflowing with botanical illustrations and incomplete verses she would never vocalize publicly. However, within an academic institution consumed by social hierarchies and superficial rankings, she remained practically transparent until fate intertwined her path with Derek Thompson. Derek embodied Maya's complete antithesis across every measurable dimension. Socially dominant, financially privileged, cherished by faculty members, worshipped by devoted followers. Saturday evening competitions weren't fundamentally about basketball performance. They centered on observing Derek sink three-pointers before celebrating with that magnetic yet insufferably cocky grin. His name traveled through hallways in hushed reverence, carved into bathroom stalls surrounded by romantic symbols, bellowed from gymnasium bleachers during home games. Behind this carefully cultivated golden reputation, however, lurked something considerably more sinister. Derek maintained a disturbing pattern of targeting individuals he perceived as vulnerable, particularly when such behavior generated laughter from his social circle. Maya, with her naturally introverted disposition, evolved into his preferred victim. The harassment campaign initiated subtly enough, ridiculing her wardrobe choices, deliberately striking books from her grasp while muttering "scholarship kid" under his breath. Gradually, his tactics grew increasingly aggressive and calculated. Handwritten messages appeared taped to her locker, bearing vicious observations about her appearance and economic circumstances. He would interject disparaging commentary whenever she participated in classroom discussions, his voice dripping with manufactured concern that fooled absolutely no one except perhaps the more naive faculty members. His ridicule followed her through every corridor like a persistent shadow, transforming each school day into an endurance trial she barely survived. Maya convinced herself that ignoring his behavior represented her strongest strategy, that maintaining dignity through silence would eventually bore him into selecting a different target. She was tragically mistaken. Silence, as she would discover, often functions as enablement rather than resistance. Night after night, she muffled her sobs in her pillow, desperate to shield her mother from additional worry during an already challenging period in their lives. The breaking point arrived during lunch period on a particularly crowded Wednesday. Derek deliberately extended his foot into the main aisle as Maya carried her tray toward an empty table. She tumbled spectacularly, sending her meal across the floor in every direction, while the entire cafeteria erupted in cruel amusement. Some students actually stood on chairs to get better photographs of her humiliation with their phones. Derek's laughter rose above all others, theatrical and deliberately prolonged for maximum effect. That afternoon, rather than retreating to her bedroom for another evening of tears and self-pity, Maya experienced something different entirely. Not explosive rage or thoughts of violence, but crystalline determination. She refused to permit him to destroy her spirit any further. Instead of wallowing, she opened her laptop and began researching personal protection courses available in their community. The downtown community center offered women's self-defense training every Monday and Wednesday evening. She enrolled immediately, using money accumulated from weekend babysitting jobs, walking there alone through unfamiliar neighborhoods, uncertain about her decision, but absolutely committed to change. Those initial sessions proved absolutely brutal. She returned home each evening with fresh bruises decorating her forearms, muscles aching in places she hadn't known existed, and feet that throbbed with each step. Despite the physical discomfort, for the first time in months, she experienced an unfamiliar sensation of personal power flowing through her system. She absorbed techniques for defending herself, methods for utilizing leverage against physically superior opponents. Most importantly, she learned that genuine strength rarely correlates with physical dimensions. Authentic strength emerges from confidence and the conscious decision to reject fear as life's primary motivating force. Week by week, Maya underwent a remarkable transformation. Her posture improved dramatically, shoulders squared rather than hunched defensively. She navigated hallways with purposeful strides instead of hurried, apologetic shuffling. Most significantly, she no longer averted her gaze when Derek smirked at her during their inevitable encounters between classes. She met his eyes directly, unflinching and unashamed. Derek noticed this evolution immediately, and it infuriated him beyond rational explanation. He despised when his victims demonstrated resilience or independence. His fragile ego demanded that Maya remain in whatever position he had assigned her within his personal social hierarchy. His friends encouraged his escalating anger, joking that Maya had grown too comfortable and needed reminding of her proper place in their school's ecosystem. This toxic combination of wounded pride and peer pressure created the conditions for the confrontation that would redefine everything for both of them. Tuesday morning found Maya organizing her mathematics materials at her assigned locker, carefully arranging textbooks according to her usual systematic approach. Derek appeared suddenly, pressing his palm against the metal door to prevent her from closing it. His companions gathered behind him like a pack of hyenas, anticipating entertainment. "Look what we have here," he announced loudly enough to attract attention from nearby students. "Little scholarship girl thinks she's somebody important now, thinks she can just walk around like she actually belongs in this school." He increased pressure against the locker door, effectively trapping her in place. Maya's pulse accelerated dramatically, but her extensive training immediately activated. Her instructor's voice echoed in her memory. "Breathe steadily, maintain awareness of your surroundings, remember your options." Derek leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper intended only for her ears. "Maybe you need a personal reminder about who controls things around here. Maybe you need to learn some respect." For the first time in their entire history of interactions, Maya looked directly into his eyes and held that gaze. When she spoke, her voice carried none of its previous trembling uncertainty. "Move away from me. Now." Derek laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor, and pressed harder against the locker. In that moment of supreme arrogance, when his confidence made him careless about defense, Maya responded with everything she had learned. One fluid motion, executed exactly as she had practiced countless times in the community center. Her knee drove upward with precise targeting and devastating effectiveness. Derek's expression shifted instantly from smug superiority to bewildered shock, then rapidly progressed to obvious agony. He crumpled toward the floor, both hands clutching his injured leg, while a strangled gasp escaped his throat. The impact echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, immediately silencing all conversation and activity. His friends stood frozen in disbelief. None of them had ever witnessed Derek vulnerable or defeated, certainly never by someone they had dismissed as utterly powerless. Maya's hands shook uncontrollably, but she didn't retreat or apologize. She simply stood there, breathing deeply, alive with the fire of dignity finally restored after months of systematic humiliation. The hallway atmosphere transformed instantly. Students emerged from classrooms to investigate the commotion, faculty members hurried from their offices, and shocked whispers began spreading like wildfire through the building. Nobody had ever successfully challenged Derek Thompson, the seemingly untouchable athletic superstar whose influence extended far beyond sports into every aspect of school social dynamics. Maya collected her mathematics textbook with deliberate calm, lifted her chin with newfound pride, and walked away from the scene. She didn't run, didn't hide, didn't offer explanations or apologies. The fundamental balance of power had shifted permanently, and nothing in their educational institution would ever return to its previous state. News of the incident traveled with supernatural speed through their interconnected social networks. By fourth period, every student possessed some version of the story, though details varied wildly, depending on the source and their relationship to either Maya or Derek. By dinner time, parents throughout the community were discussing the incident over family meals, debating questions of bullying, self-defense, and appropriate responses to harassment. By morning, faculty members whispered about the situation in the staff workroom, uncertain how to process what had occurred or how to prevent similar incidents. Public opinion divided sharply along predictable lines. Some community members argued that Maya had overreacted dangerously, that physical violence never represents an acceptable solution to social conflicts, regardless of provocation. Others maintained that Derek had finally received consequences proportionate to his years of systematic cruelty, that bullies only understand strength, and Maya had simply spoken Derek's native language. However, one undeniable truth emerged from all the controversy and debate. Maya Rodriguez was no longer invisible. Derek, meanwhile, confronted a reality he had never imagined possible. His leg injury proved more severe than initially apparent, requiring extensive medical evaluation and potentially months of physical therapy. The basketball season, which had represented his pathway to college recruitment and athletic scholarships, suddenly appeared uncertain at best. Dreams he had cultivated since childhood now hung by the slenderest of threads, dependent on healing that might never fully restore his previous capabilities. His parents, initially outraged by what they perceived as an unprovoked attack on their son, gradually learned the fuller context of Derek's behavior toward Maya and other students. Conversations in their household grew increasingly uncomfortable as they recognized patterns of entitlement and cruelty they had unknowingly enabled through years of unconditional support for their son's social dominance. When the initial shock and anger began to fade, Derek found himself alone with his thoughts for perhaps the first time in years. In that silence, guilt crept in like fog rolling across a landscape. He remembered every cruel comment, every deliberate humiliation, every time he had reduced Maya to tears for the simple pleasure of entertaining his friends. Lying in bed with his leg elevated and wrapped in medical bandages, he began to grasp the true cost of arrogance and systematic cruelty. Maya also wrestled with complex emotions in the days following their confrontation. She had never intended to seriously injure anyone or potentially destroy Derek's athletic dreams, but she couldn't honestly regret defending herself after months of torment. During quiet evening hours, she replayed the incident repeatedly, not with satisfaction, but with an unexpected sense of heaviness she hadn't anticipated. Personal power, she discovered, carried far more weight and responsibility than she had imagined. It didn't taste as sweet as she had hoped it would during her darkest moments of victimization. Instead, it felt like a burden, a recognition that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, that she had permanently altered not just her own life, but Derek's as well. The weeks that followed brought unexpected changes for both students. Maya found herself navigating an entirely different social landscape, where other previously invisible students began seeking her companionship, drawn to someone who had successfully stood up to the school's most notorious bully. Teachers viewed her differently, some with newfound respect, others with barely concealed concern about her potential for violence. Derek's recovery progressed slowly, complicated by infections and setbacks that cast increasing doubt on his athletic future. His former friends gradually distanced themselves as his social status diminished, revealing the shallow foundation of relationships built primarily on power and popularity. He began attending sessions with the school counselor, initially under parental pressure, but eventually with genuine interest in understanding how he had become the person Maya felt compelled to stop. The community center where Maya continued her self-defense training became a sanctuary where she could process the complex emotions surrounding her actions. Her instructor, a former police officer who had witnessed countless situations involving bullying and retaliation, helped Maya understand that defending oneself sometimes requires difficult choices with lasting consequences. She learned that courage isn't the absence of fear or guilt, but the willingness to act according to one's principles despite emotional turmoil. As autumn progressed toward winter, both Maya and Derek found themselves fundamentally changed by their confrontation and its aftermath. Maya developed into a confident advocate for other students facing harassment, using her experience to help others find their voices without necessarily resorting to physical confrontation. She discovered that her quiet strength, once perceived as weakness, actually represented a form of power that could inspire and protect others. Derek's journey proved more challenging and uncertain. His physical recovery remained incomplete, effectively ending his basketball career and forcing him to reconsider his entire identity and future plans. However, the loss of athletic dreams created space for personal growth he might never have achieved otherwise. He began working with younger students as part of his community service requirement, gradually learning to use his natural leadership abilities in constructive rather than destructive ways. The incident between Maya and Derek became a defining moment for their entire school community, sparking conversations about bullying, self-defense, social hierarchies, and the complex dynamics that exist within adolescent environments. Parents, teachers, and administrators were forced to acknowledge that their previous approaches to addressing harassment had been inadequate, that some situations require more decisive intervention than simply encouraging victims to ignore their tormentors. Neither Maya nor Derek would claim that violence solved their problems or recommend physical confrontation as a universal solution to bullying. However, their story illustrates the complicated realities of power, dignity, and self-respect in environments where traditional authority figures fail to protect vulnerable individuals. Maya's transformation from invisible victim to confident advocate demonstrates that personal strength can emerge from the most challenging circumstances, while Derek's journey from bully to someone seeking redemption shows that even those who cause harm can potentially change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. The hallway where their confrontation occurred became, in many ways, a symbol of transformation for their entire school community. Students walked past that section of lockers with different awareness, understanding that power dynamics could shift in an instant, that the quiet individuals they might be tempted to dismiss or torment possessed depths of strength and determination that weren't immediately visible. Maya Rodriguez and Derek Thompson would both carry the memory of that Tuesday morning for the rest of their lives, though they would interpret its meaning differently as they matured and gained perspective on their adolescent experiences. For Maya, it represented the moment she discovered her voice and refused to remain a victim. For Derek, it marked the beginning of a painful but necessary process of recognizing the harm he had caused and working to become someone worthy of forgiveness and respect. Their story reminds us that every individual possesses dignity that deserves protection, that silence in the face of cruelty often enables further harm, and that the strength to stand up for oneself can emerge from the most unexpected sources. It also illustrates that actions have consequences, sometimes devastating ones, and that choosing to treat others with respect and kindness isn't just morally correct but practically wise. The community surrounding their school learned that addressing bullying requires more than policies and procedures. It demands a fundamental commitment to creating environments where every person feels valued and protected. Maya's courage in defending herself, while controversial in its methods, sparked conversations and changes that benefited countless other students who might otherwise have suffered in silence. Years later, both Maya and Derek would look back on that Tuesday morning as a turning point that shaped their understanding of themselves and their responsibilities toward others. Neither would claim that their story provides easy answers to complex problems, but both would acknowledge that sometimes the most profound changes emerge from moments of crisis, when individuals are forced to confront fundamental questions about dignity, respect, and the courage required to stand up for what is right.